Hi. So the next step is to make sure that your topic is narrow enough and that you can put together a writing question for research. And so I've given you some examples here, and then at the end, we're going to look at some samples, and I'm going to give you a chance to kind of identify what's wrong, and then I'll tell you how I would fix it or what's the problem with it, right? So these first two you see before you under examples are actually research questions that I've had to answer within the last year as the writing program coordinator at the college. And so the first one, Professor Choate and I were tasked with creating training for our English faculty in using universal design for learning on campus. And so that was my topic, right? And so then I had research questions. So the first one is, what resources are the best for helping English faculty implement UDL in their online classes? So notice how I narrowed it from classes to online classes, right? The other thing that's not here is that it's college faculty, and that would be another factor. If you watch the video about, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and the time, category, location, and issue, then this is something that I would need to add there too, that I'm talking about faculty in college, not high school faculty or elementary school faculty. How can trainers get English faculty on board with UDL? So there's another one. So notice these are not yes, no questions. These are actually open-ended questions that I can't just say yes or no, right? So an example is, should trainers get faculty on board with UDL? And there's, well, yes, right? That would be a yes, no question. But I can say, why should they get them on board, or how could they? And that turns it into an open-ended question. The third question there is, why is UDL an effective method for designing English classes, right? Now, the problems with B and C is that they might end up being just information papers. There might not be a lot of controversy or debate about how to convince English teachers to do this, or what is effective about UDL for English classes. So if I have to write a persuasive paper, which is what you guys have to do, then B and C as is might not actually lead me to meeting those requirements, right? And so that's why if you look under the research question criteria, hello, relevance, does it meet the assignment requirements, is an important part of that, right? Excuse me. So you can have a great topic and all that, but it just doesn't meet the assignment that you're having to do. And so that might eliminate two of those three possible questions. Sorry. So the next topic is fundamentals of language arts classes at the community college. So now I do have that where, community college. I do have that specific what, fundamentals classes, but I don't have a who, I don't have an issue, right? So when I ask the question to research, this is one of them. What are the benefits? So by asking what, I'm asking an open-ended question, right? What are the benefits, there's my issue, of eliminating prerequisite remediation in English composition at the community college level, right? So benefits isn't, the issue. Eliminating prerequisite remediation is the issue, right? The who would be, again, community colleges, right? Or maybe English faculty. The where is the community college level, right? So that might be where you're talking to community college teachers, but you might also be talking to higher regents, right? So the who here is not very clear. So that would be one thing that in the research I would want to look at. Well, who do I need to talk to this, right? The location, obviously, community college. And so again, this is very specific, right? What are the benefits? I might find out that there aren't any, right? Or that it's mixed, right? I have done research, and actually, yes, I could make an argument with lots of research about why we should eliminate prerequisite, right? The next question is very similar, but it's looking at a different part of the equation. Why should community colleges offer co-requisite English remediation instead of prerequisite remediation? So in the first question, I'm going to be probably talking about co-requisite, but my focus is on prerequisite. In the second question, I'm more focused on co-requisite. This is a really good example of how I could do the same research and yet find two different papers out of it, right? I think this is a helpful example because you may be taking another class where you have written a research paper, And you think, well, I can just use that for my composition research paper. Well, no, you can't. That's considered self-plagiarism. You can't just turn in a paper that you wrote for another class, right? Now, you can always ask the teacher, but usually they're going to say, well, no, you can't turn in that paper, but you could write about an issue within that. So you've written this paper, you've got all of this research. Well, just find another issue to argue or debate that would still allow you to use most of that research. You probably have to do a little bit more, right? But again, academics do this all the time. We try to get as much bang for our buck when we spend a lot of time with a topic. We write multiple articles about that is, that we've learned about, right? The last one, this is kind of related to my example of the TED Talk that I gave you guys about happiness, right? So my topic is writing creative nonfiction about sadder life events. So creative nonfiction is the category, right? The what here, or the who here, is obviously writers, probably, right? The issue is writing about sad life events, right? And the time, well, there's really no specific time here. Obviously, the time would be the future or the present, right? We're talking about things that in the past, right? So I'm interested in that. So what's my first research question? What is the value of viewing tragic life events through the lens of humor in essays, right? So by saying value, I'm looking to see, is there a debate? And there is. I think some people don't think that it's suitable to write about sad events in any way other than very sadly and respectfully. They don't see humor as being respectful. So I think there is a debate about, is this something that has value? I don't know that it's a serious controversial debate, but I do know people have different opinions about this, right? So if there's a writer out there and maybe they had a teacher who said, no, you can't write humor about this, is too serious, this might be a paper that shows them there's another view to that, right? How do writers transform tragedy into comedy when writing autobiographical essays? This one is probably going to be just purely informative, right? I don't know that there's a lot of controversy or debate. And again, debate does not mean controversy. It just means people have different theories about why to do something. So if I look into this and I find that there are, maybe 2 or 3 very different opinions about what's the best way to do that, then I would have an argumentative topic to pursue. But I really doubt that there is a debate. Just because there are different ways of doing something doesn't necessarily mean that it's a debate. Though again, if there are very separate, distinct schools of doing something, you might argue why one school is better than the other, right? In a particular situation for a particular group, right? And again, that first one is definitely going to be argumentative, right? Value is one of the 5 kinds of claims that we can make when we write an argument, right? We can argue that something has worth, and value can be monetary value, but it can also be social value, spiritual value, right? It's just worth something, whatever currency you're looking at, right? We can argue claims of policy, that we should change or we should create a law, and that could be a very formal law that goes through the state house or the Congress or whatever. It could be more of a policy that goes on in your workplace or school. It could even just be a social rule that people kind of follow, but it's not an actual formal law, but we tend to have the same beliefs that this is the way something should be done, right? We can argue fact, right? So if there's people who are debating whether something is true or not, you could argue, yes, this is the reasons why this is true, right? We can argue cause or effect, right? We just got through writing a cause and effect paper. And so again, you can make an argument about what caused something or what the effect's going to be about something, right? And we can argue definition. What does something mean? What is something, right? For example, people want to argue about what is life, and that is one of the controversial aspects of abortion. We don't know what life is in terms of defining when it begins, right? People want to argue about what marriage is. Can marriage be between people of the same sex? Can it be more than 2 people, right? So again, there are things that we define in a very particular way that's based on our values and all of that. And sometimes people challenge those, and we have to think about, should we redefine this, right? Gender identity is another thing that we're going through right now, that we're looking at redefinition of what it means to be male and female, and are those the only options, right? So again, writing about definition, that's a different type of claim. Okay, so now let's look at these sample research questions. There is something wrong with all of them, but it differs. So let's look at the first one. You can pause the video after I get finished before I tell you what I think is wrong with this, right? So why do young people lack respect? So pause the video and think about, why is this not a good research question as it is. Okay, so the problem with this is that, first of all, it stereotypes young people as being disrespectful. And that's the really strong problem here, right? Young people don't necessarily lack respect. Old people don't have necessarily respect, right? So that's more of an opinion than anything. You could talk about how young people define respect in a way that's very different from other generations, and this can cause miscommunication, right? So that would be a definition, right, paper. Let me tell you how young people are redefining respect in a way that can cause problems because of generation gap, right? 5, how can we clean the oceans of pollution? So pause and think about what are some of the, the who, what, where, when, why, the time, category, issue, kind of thing there. Okay, so the problem is, so the who here is we, right? So for a argumentative paper, usually you can't talk in first person, so you would need to identify a more specific we, right? The issue is pollution, right? The where is the ocean, right? And the time is obviously probably today or in the future, present or the future, right? So the problem is this is way too broad, right? There are lots of oceans, right? Which ocean are you talking about specifically? And what kind of pollution? Are you talking about pollution caused by oil spills? Are you talking about pollution caused by the Fukushima nuclear power plant problem that sent out nuclear waste into the ocean? Are you talking about pollution caused by people drinking on their boat and throwing their, beer cans over the side, right? There's lots of different levels of pollution there. And so you would need to focus on a specific group, specific type of pollution, and probably a specific, not even a specific ocean, but a specific area. Because the Pacific is huge. So maybe it's the coastal area of California or something, right? So again, it's lots of possibilities here, but it needs a lot of work to get it to a point where you can talk about it in a very more narrow place. Should cities forcibly remove homeless people? Okay, pause and think about how we can make that better. Okay, so hopefully you'll have seen that cities is far too broad, right? Because the size of a city is going to determine, first of all, the number of homeless people that they have to deal with, but also the kind of resources that they have, right? Forcibly remove is kind of a very specific kind of action. It's not going to be, having people volunteer to go. They're actually probably talking about having National Guard or the police force or whatever, right? So forcibly removed is a kind of a more of aggressive kind of way of dealing with homelessness. So again, if that's not what you're talking about, you might need to think about, well, do I really want to talk about forced, right? And homeless people might be too broad as well, because there are different kinds of homeless people, right? Are you going to forcibly remove someone who has mental health issues that might, be violent? There are runaways, right? Children that are living on the street. Are you going to just all lock them up? And what happens to them? If you actually take in an underage child, you actually have a legal responsibility to make sure that child is taken care of. So if you just forcibly remove them, well, that might actually be ethically and legally a problem, right? And so again, I think that there's possibilities here, but you need to really think about, okay, what resources does the city have? So you don't have to talk about Shawnee, for example. You're probably not going to find a lot of research about Shawnee and homeless people, though it is an issue. But instead you could think, okay, Shawnee is a city of a certain size. So maybe I could look and see if there's research about cities the size of Shawnee dealing with homelessness, and then apply those to Shawnee, right? Okay, number 7. Why does OU's football team suck this year? Okay, let's pause and think about that one. Okay, so the problem with this one is it's really more of an opinion. First of all, suck is not a formal term, so that is not an appropriate use of language, right? The second problem is there's not going to be enough research on this that's credible. You're going to find a lot of people's opinion. They're going to be analysts on TV, but they're not necessarily experts and all of that, right? Plus, the season hasn't finished. So how do we know, right? And so again, that's just a lot of problems. You could maybe analyze why a certain team, I'm a Cubs fan, and again, before they won the World Series, there were many close misses, and there was the famous Bartman incident, right? Where this man named Bartman, there was a fly ball and he reached out and he caught it when actually the Cub player could have caught it, right? And got the out. It was highly disruptive. And the Cubs went on to lose that game and then lose like the next two in a row and lose the chance to go to the World Series, right? It was just or it might have whether were they in the World Series? I don't know. It's been a while. My friends fondly remember my rant about that incident, right? I could look at that incident because it was so infamous that people look at it. Well, what psychologically happened to the Cubs? They were ahead, right? Not only in the game, but in the series. How did they collapse so thoroughly that not just that game, okay, that game, all right, you write off, but then the next two games, right? You could analyze what happened if you really were familiar with it, and then look at how psychology could provide answers to what happened to the Cubs that led to that, right? And then again, that would be like any athlete or sports team might find that interesting, right? So that could be how you might take that, right? What is the best way to study? Okay, think about that one. Okay, so the problem with this is, who are you talking to, right? Is studying the same for every age group and every situation? Obviously, no. So that is the first thing that needs to be fixed. Who are you talking to? So pick a specific age group. And then that is going to help you look at, well, what are they actually learning, that might go to a different kind of learning style, right? There are different kinds of studying. So maybe you're going to focus on what is the best way for a kinesthetic learner in college to study for a humanities class, right? So a kinesthetic learner is someone who likes to learn by doing, right? Well, you can imagine in a humanities class, like literature, there's not a whole lot of hands-on kind of stuff, right? I could have you write a sonnet when we study Elizabethan sonnets, but that's not really the same thing, right? Sometimes I take my World Lit class over to the art room and we practice writing on clay tablets at the beginning to look at the difficulties in writing, 10,000 years ago, right? That's a kinesthetic kind of interaction, and it's a lot of fun, but there's just not a whole lot of things in humanities class, at least in English, that allow us to do kind of hands-on stuff, right? So that's a challenge to somebody who learns best that way. So I might write a paper about, well, how can people who are hands-on learners adapt to a class that has no really hands-on application, right? So that would be a very specific focus to a specific group. And again, age is important there because, again, what a young person is able to do as opposed to an adult is very different. So you'd want to think about a particular age, a particular kind of learning style, a particular kind of class, right? Because again, nobody studies or nobody should study the same way for every subject. I know I study quite differently for math because math does not stick in my brain than I do for anything that is like literature-based, like history, psychology, and all that. I just soak that stuff up. Math, right? So again, those are some of those contexts, right? Why should kids not use social media? Okay, so kids, how old are we talking about here? So that's the first thing. Kids, right? Social media is also too broad because there's lots of different kinds of social media, and some social media is more geared towards adults, and some social media is for younger people. So I would say you need to refine the age, and then who are you talking to? Are you talking to parents? Are you talking to legislators? Are you talking to teachers who might want to use social media in class, and you're trying to say, these are the best kinds of social media to use in your 5th grade class, right? So again, lots of narrowing that needs to be done there, right? Number 10, why should the U.S. require military service for men? All right, well, this one actually has a lot going for it, right? We've got a location, the U.S., we've got a who, men, we've got an issue, require military service, and the timeline is probably the present or the future, right? So what's wrong with this question? Well, the main problem is it's a bit sexist, right? Why only men? right? Women can serve in the military, so why would only men be required to have mandatory military service? So that's one of the problems. If you actually think only men should have mandatory military service, then that would be your argument. I don't know that's a logical argument, though. The other problem is, well, what age men? If all of a sudden we say from, next week on, all men must sign up for mandatory military service unless they've already served. Are we talking about my 87-year-old uncle? Are we only talking about men that are 18 to 28, right? So again, those are the things that you would have to narrow here for it to work, but most of it's in a good place to at least go and do research. Number 11, where must states focus spending to improve the economy? All right, hopefully you saw that states is a problem because not all states have the same economy. Not all states have the same parts to the economy. Oklahoma has a very strong gas and oil industry. You're not going to see that in other states. So again, states, you'd have to focus that to a particular state probably, right? Spending to improve the economy, well, what part of the economy? And who are you wanting to influence, right? I mean, the economy is just too big, right? So I would say narrow it down. You might even say, how can Oklahoma spend money to, help senior citizens on a tight budget, right? That would, be something that you have a very specific thing to do, right? And improve, again, what does improve mean, right? Are you going to give tax cuts to the corporations? Because that'll certainly help them with money, but that might hurt people in the pocketbook, right? So that's going to have a negative impact, right? So again, that's just got too many broad things, but it's definitely got a lot of argumentation. You just need to focus it. Number 12, how does the voting process work? Right? So this one is problematic because, I forgot. Number 6, should cities force? I forgot that. That's a yes or no question, right? So you have to say why should or how could, right? So how does the voting process work? That is going to be just an information paper. So it's really not phrased here in a way that's going to elicit a debate, right? Plus, the voting process is different every state. So you can't just say there's one voting process when it comes to the actual nitty gritty, right? So I would say, you could focus on a particular state. And then I think you have to find a debatable issue. Like you might say, why should all states adopt Oklahoma's voting process, right? We actually do have an effective one. It's not digital, right? We scan our sheets into that place that counts it. But again, it's like kind of a Scantron, right? We could go to electronic voting things, but actually we get our vote in, it's solid, it's easy to do, and we have our results back pretty quickly. Whereas they're still tallying votes in Arizona and Nevada. I'm like, what the heck, right? And so, if you really understand Oklahoma's voting system, you think it actually is the best one for everyone. That's one thing. If you think, you could argue that why should all states adopt the same voting process, right? There's another argument, right? Right, that you can make. Last question, should college campuses have free parking for students? So again, that's a yes or no question. So we would need to, first of all, change it into an open-ended question. Why should, how could, college campuses is too broad because, again, OU has issues that we don't here at Seminole State, or if you're an online campus, right? And so you would need to focus in on a particular size of campus. Free parking for students, again, that's you've got a specific who, you've got a location, college campuses needs to be refined, you've got the issue is free parking, the time obviously is the present. And so again, that if you focus on a particular level of college campus, then that actually, has some possibilities there, right? The only thing is, I don't know if there is a lot of research that you can find about that, right? So again, research questions just take us up to a certain point. We have to then go out and make sure that we can find enough information. And that's why I have you do some of these steps. And that's why in the paper proposal, you'll actually have to find 3 credible sources so that that you got at least 3 out of 5, right? Because again, it might be that you have a really great question, but you just can't get your hands on the information you need to make that argument. So again, just because you have a great research question doesn't mean that it's going to actually end up being something you could write about. That's just part of that process, right? So I hope this helped. Again, email me if you've got questions. I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. Bye-bye.